Would you consider that debate music, Brenda?
You know what? It's what we're using, so yes. We can talk about the debate. You thought it sounded a little Madonna-ish.
There is a Madonna-esque vibe to that song here this morning. Sunrise Extra on a Wednesday. It is Brenda, it is myself, and it is Jim Moore joining us to talk about last night's debate between President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden. Jim Moore, political science professor. Jim, we've asked our viewers to text us questions, so we're going to go through those as well. If you ever catch us looking at our phones this morning, Jim, it is just us looking for the viewer questions as we roll along live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter this morning. Brenda, would you like, since I'm still looking for viewer questions, would you like to present Jim with the first question of the morning?
Oh, absolutely. I've got one comment because I put this up on my Facebook page, Jim, as well, and people are already responding. And I hear a lot of people say they turned it off, they couldn't watch, they were disgusted, they were disappointed. And it made me think of that old quote. I think it was from George Bernard Shaw, the one that said, "Never wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty and the pigs like it." I feel like the audience came away going, what just happened? I don't feel good after hearing the two candidates go at it. Can you initially just give me some of your thoughts about what you saw?
Well, that was a very, very common reaction. Debates themselves are usually not that illuminating. The questions are not that good. They're kind of things we already know about. And Chris Wallace's questions last night were of that quality. We already knew how they both stood on everything that he asked. And then the candidates come back with canned answers. Well, we didn't get canned answers last night. We got this slugfest. And, personally, because the debates don't bring much, I don't really like to watch them unless somebody is basically going to ask me about them, which basically happens all the time. But this time, man, yeah, I wanted to reach for the remote, but it's no, I can't. I've got to watch this thing all the way through. It was a real visceral reaction. The ratings are going to be fascinating to see if they started off huge and then went down. What happened with it. But in terms of the mud and the pigs wrestling with each other, some interesting things are beginning to come out. There's some pollsters who do focus groups. So they have people who are undecided voters who will watch these things and then respond to it. And the first focus groups that I heard of, actually, the people came out and said that Trump was demeaning, unpresidential, all these kinds of things. But they said Joe Biden looked presidential, looked like he was the one who was in control. And so if that is what kind of comes out of this, that'll be fascinating, because for a lot of us, we just saw, as a BBC person put it last night afterwards with Chris Wallace in there, three old guys who kept talking over each other and couldn't agree on what day it was.
You mentioned the BBC, so that was one of the things we were going to ask you about this morning since you went there, Jim. Some of the international response to last night's debate.
Yeah, I follow a lot of international sources, especially in Europe and then in Japan and a few in the Middle East. And it was in the middle of the night, it was the #1 story on their websites, on newspapers in Italy and places like that. And all of them used words like chaos. They used that the system had caught on fire. A little bit further down, it was questions about whether America's democracy was going to survive. So they saw what we saw and reacted in a very similar way, very disappointed and confused about what was going on. So, the foreign policy debate is supposed to happen later, but it's interesting. The initial reaction is, what on earth is going on over there in the United States? Add that together with COVID and our high deaths and things like that. And the world is raising its eyebrows at what's going on here.
All right, we want to bring in a viewer question. If our crew can put that up on the screen, I can read it for you, Jim, because people have a lot of things that they're wondering about. So this one says, for the debate expert, how would you describe Trump's behavior during the debate? What do you think?
Well, there's the obvious. He was rude, he cut in and things like that, but it was very calculated. Trump and his team have been saying that Joe Biden is not with it. He's too old. He's not ready to be president. And Trump wanted to throw him off his game. He wanted to make Joe Biden, begin to do gaffes, begin to get tongue-tied. And that's exactly what he did with his opponents in the Republican debates in 2015 and 16. Right. It's what he also tried to do, and sometimes was successful, with Hillary Clinton in 2016. So his actions, especially in that first 15 minutes, were very deliberate trying to knock Biden off his game. Then after that, he then seemed to revert to the way he does things when he's out on the campaign trail. We know from the Trump camp that he did not do specific debate prep. He said, my everyday job is debate prep. When I go and talk to groups at campaign rallies, when I spar with the reporters, that's the debate prep. And so the rest of the debate we saw last night was exactly that. The insults, the trying to make the message about what he wants, not answering the questions. That's classic Trump. And that's why when we look at it from the outside, it looks like a mess, but it's exactly what his supporters have come to expect and want to see from him. So in that point, it was very calculated, and I think it would work for him. The problem he has is he's behind in the polls. He's got to gain voters, and I don't think his behavior last night was able to gain him any voters.
That's what I was thinking, Jim. If you're, let's just say someone is lukewarm on Trump, they're sort of on the fence, but maybe they were leaning that way. There had to be some disappointment there because there were opportunities maybe last night for Joe Biden, if left alone, to just answer the questions, to come across as maybe uninformed or ill-advised, but he never even had the opportunities to go down that road because the president was stepping over him.
Yeah, absolutely. There was one point, probably about 55, 60 minutes in, when actually Biden was able to talk for, I counted it, 1 minute and 45 seconds uninterrupted. And I was wondering if Trump had stepped off the stage or something. It was amazing. Yeah, the Trump people Trump didn't allow Biden to establish who Biden was so that people could see that and measure it, and then say, oh, I want to choose Trump because he's got a better idea,
right,
or he's the one whose personality I like better, or any of those things. He just dominated everything, and so that subtlety was never able to happen.
All right, let's listen to some more viewer comments because they're talking about not only questions, but they also are just giving us their take on what they saw. Jeannie says, out of control. Neither did well. Hope the next one is controlled. And then we have Linda Wilkinson who says that was no debate. Debates are civil. Yeah, I would agree with that. We haven't seen it. And then Marjorie Hurd said that was painful and uncomfortable to watch. And we have one more. Michael Ferguson says ridiculous, and any other debates are just a waste of time. So would you say that based on what happened to Chris Wallace last night, losing control with that debate and just everybody a jumble of talking over each other, Jim, do you see the process, the format changing in any way, shape or form for debate 2 and 3?
Well, remember, one of the future debates is supposed to be a town hall format, and we've known from the past that they bring a different flavor because there are actual voters there, and the candidates really don't want to be seen as bullying a voter who's just asked a question. So the town hall format may go forward, but the third debate that's going to bring back the moderator, the single moderator, I don't see how it can go forward unless Trump and Biden agree to follow the rules and follow the moderator. As Chris Wallace kept saying, I'm the moderator. I'm the one who's supposed to be directing this. Unless they agree to follow that direction,
right,
I don't see how it can go forward. You know, if I were sitting on the commission that runs the debates, I would look at last night and I would send a message to both campaigns saying, unless you can agree to act in a more civil manner, you are wasting our time. The American people don't get anything from this. We are not going to give you free airtime to talk to millions of people. We're going to do the vice presidential debate. Basically, October 7th is when that's scheduled. And we aren't going to come back to you again unless you can agree that you're going to behave. And then, as one commentary I saw last night said, you know, give the moderator a mute button. That might be the best thing to do.
I was telling Brenda, I was excited to watch last night. You know, honestly, I was looking forward to it. In fact, I taped it and we waited about 30 minutes so that our kids would be home so they could watch it with us. And it was disappointing. I don't feel like there is a need to see another 2 debates if they are like the one we saw last night. But Jim, I was saying to Brenda, my kids are 13, they're twins, and they found it highly entertaining. But I said to her, I don't think the point is for these debates to appeal to 13-year-old boys.
Yeah, and it looked kind of like 13-year-old boys up there on the stage.
So can you give me a rundown of, let's start with President Trump. Where did he score? Where did he land legitimate punches?
Well, I think towards the end, climate change was the last big set of questions, and I was not expecting it to even make it in there because they were running long, but Chris Wallace stuck with it. And on climate change, President Trump was doing his usual thing. He doesn't really believe that people cause climate change and things like that. But he talked about we need to better manage the forest. He didn't go where he's gone in the past, where people ridiculed him, saying, oh, you need to rake the forests. That doesn't make any sense. But he said we need to better match the forest. Now, that resonates in places on the West Coast. That resonates in timber towns in Oregon, because one of the big reasons we've had these fires is not just climate change, but we've had this fire suppression strategy going basically for 70 years that's allowed buildup in the forests. And the idea in like timber towns in Oregon is we could clean up that buildup of trees and branches and things, turn it into biomass, so we could put loggers to work cleaning that up and then bring back an economy to those places. So I think the president scored well there. But that was about it, because the other things, he was basically making fun of Joe Biden's stance, or he was saying things that have been discredited. So, for instance, talking about COVID, he's saying, I'm the one who shut the door. It's clearly on the record that he was really loath to shut down people coming in from China. It took his experts a few weeks to basically say, no, this is something you need to do. And so there were other things where he was just playing into kind of the caricature of himself that's built up, not really scoring points. But I think that forest management thing was a well-placed point and could play well for him, especially here in the West.
What about Joe Biden? What was his strongest moment during the debate?
Well, Joe Biden's strongest moments usually got overshadowed because Donald Trump started overpowering them. But Joe Biden showed strength in terms of talking about the impact of the Affordable Care Act, what it actually does. Joe Biden also showed really a separation between him and the left wing of the party. Trump kept, as he's been doing, it's a campaign theme, he wants to say Joe Biden is part of the radical leftists. In fact, Joe Biden might be a Trojan horse, and Bernie Sanders and AOC are actually going to be the president. Joe Biden did a really good job of saying the Green New Deal is not my plan. He kept coming in and saying, no, that's not what I said. Here's what I said. This is why it's moderate. For instance, on defunding the police. Trump tried to tar him with that, and he said, no, that's not what I've called for. I've called for these kinds of reforms. So Biden was pretty clear on that. The thing is, it was Trump's strategy to drown that out. And I think to a great extent, Trump was successful in doing that.
You mentioned defunding police. Let's talk a little bit more about that part of the debate last night. Several cities were mentioned throughout the debate. Portland mentioned a few times. And one of the questions that was put right to Joe Biden was the question about the protests here over the last few months and how he would handle them. Let's listen first, and then, Jim, you can react to this answer from Joe Biden.
I've made it clear in my public statements that the violence should be prosecuted. It should be prosecuted. And anyone who commits it
But you've never called for the people, the leader. Excuse me, sir. You have never called for the leaders in Portland and in Oregon to bring in the National Guard and knock off 100 days of riots.
They can, in fact, take care of it if he just stay out of the way. Look here.
Oh, really?
Really? Here's the thing.
I sent in the U.S. Marshals to get the killer of the young man in the middle of the street. They shot him. And for 3 days,
President Trump,
Portland wouldn't do anything. I had to send in the U.S. Marshals. They took care of business.
I guess I should have said it was the beginning of an answer from Joe Biden, and then we got back into some more of that talking over one another. But there was an exchange there, Jim. After that exchange was through, did you feel like that was a quote unquote winning moment for either candidate?
Well, I think Biden missed a real opportunity. He made the point that he's a private citizen. It's not his job to call the governor of Oregon and the mayor of the city and say you should bring in the National Guard. But that kind of got lost. And part of it is Chris Wallace doesn't really understand what the protests are and how they work here. I don't think Joe Biden does, and it's clear the president does either. And so they're basically concentrating on the very late night things when the fires break out, whereas we know from living here that it's a long time of peaceful stuff, and then at a certain time, it's like the alarm clock goes off, and a few dozen people start doing all this stuff, and that's what gets in the news. That's what people see. So I think Biden missed an opportunity here to basically swing the answer from the police and the riots to the underlying causes of it. What's happening here, why there's anger. My overall impression was, just as we've seen since July when the president started focusing on Portland, it's not Portland itself that's the issue. We're simply the poster child for Democratic-run cities, and the president wants to make that a campaign issue. And that continued last night. Biden's answer was not very good. Trump's override wasn't very good, and Wallace's question wasn't the greatest either.
Can we listen to the president, because he also mentioned Portland when he talked about law enforcement support? Do we have that clip that we can play?
I have Ohio. I have Portland. The sheriff just came out today and he said, I support President Trump.
Okay, there is no Portland sheriff. People online were quick to point that out, but Multnomah County Sheriff Mike Reese did tweet that he is not a Donald Trump supporter and he would never support Donald Trump. So everybody's watching, Jim, the responses, the fact checking, I didn't say that. It was coming from all sides.
Yeah, it was really interesting because watching it, I thought, my God, did I miss something today?
Same thing.
I was diving into my sites trying to figure out, did Reese come out and endorse him today? And nothing came up, and then the tweet came out just a few minutes later. It's interesting because the president's way of dealing with things, and we know this, is that he tells lies. That's the way it is, and his supporters love it because for them, it means he's getting to a deeper truth and he's fighting big government. And if he has to tell some stories to get there, that's wonderful. Other people look at it and say, well, you can't trust the guy. So in the blizzard of things that were said last night, this to me was the easiest to verify and easiest to identify as a lie, and yet the president went and did it anyway. So it was fascinating that he felt the freedom to do something that is so quickly and easily checked and just make something up. It'll be interesting to see how his supporters deal with that. People live here in Portland. There's a lot of Trump supporters in Portland, the Portland area. Are they just going to say, probably, oh, that was just him just speaking off the cuff and that's fine? Or are they going to say he doesn't know what's happening here? So it'll be just fascinating to see how that plays out.
Just to let our viewers know, we made calls last night and haven't heard back yet, but I know we put calls into the Clackamas County Sheriff, the Washington County Sheriff, thinking maybe there was somebody else that the president was referring to, because we know it's not Mike Reese. And maybe he had his titles confused. So, we were putting in the calls, trying to give somebody there the benefit of the doubt that he was referring to something perhaps truthful, but to this point, there doesn't appear to be any truth to that statement.
Jim, do you think...
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Do you think that there is validity, and if so, how much, to the secret Trump voter? Everybody was surprised back in 2016. They didn't see it coming, but he did get elected. And now I've heard on various networks, Trump supporters, his surrogates out there saying what we're counting on is the secret Trump voter. They don't want to tell you that they're going to vote for the president, but they will.
Yeah, I'm absolutely positive there are secret Trump voters out there, but at this point, it doesn't look like there are very many of them. Here's the difference. In 2016, there were people who were undecided or leaning towards Clinton, but at the last minute voted for Trump. So they weren't exactly secret, but they made up their minds at the last minute. That was big in places like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Michigan. The difference here now is in 2014, the undecideds were 14 or 15% consistently in national polls and in those crucial battleground states. Right now, the undecideds are 3 to 5%. Even in the battleground states, there's some places in the battleground states where it's only 2% undecided. So to me, that says that there are secret Trump voters out there. They're going to be a lot fewer simply because it looks like people are set in their opinions. And that those polling numbers on being set in their opinions predate the election. That's Trump's approval ratings basically over the last 4 years. They haven't budged that much. So I don't think that there are secret Trump voters out there, because the approval ratings and the polling that we're getting on the presidential election are synced. They're more in agreement than not. And that indicates to me that there just aren't that many secret Trump voters out there.
Jim, I'm taking a look at some of the viewer comments right now, and if we're going to go through some of these, I would try to, I would like to do it as fairly as possible and hear from people who represent both sides. But Rhonda Thompson-Jones did weigh in, going back to that moment where the president referred to the sheriff of Portland, and she says here, he never stated who the sheriff was, no name was mentioned. She says there is a sheriff in every county. So just going back to what I mentioned earlier about how we did put in calls to Clackamas and Washington counties, we did hear back this morning, Jim, I just heard this from our producer, we did hear back from Washington County, and they said that they will not be supporting Donald Trump in the future. So it was not a Washington County Sheriff's Office deal. We know it was not Mike Reese. Just want to continue to clarify that as we get more information this morning, and we have to still wait and hear from Clackamas County. Pat Sullivan, meanwhile, says this morning on our Facebook live stream, good morning, Pat, by the way, thank you for watching. She says, watching the debate with Trump's constant interruptions last night reminded me of something my grandmother told me about 50 years ago. In a discussion or a debate, when your opponent constantly interrupts you, it's because they know they have already lost and are desperately trying to save face. Was true then and still is. I don't know if you see it that way. Obviously, there were interruptions, Jim, but I don't know if you feel like it's the actions of someone who feels like they're losing ground or has lost ground.
I don't feel that he's losing, because so much of it matches what he has done on the campaign trail. Mm-hmm. It is naturally who he is. But a lot of international observers looked at it and identified exactly what she did. They said it looked like a last act of desperation to try to move voters. And some of the Republican analysts that I've heard last night and this morning say that Trump missed a real opportunity here to show off Biden as he wanted Biden to appear. Trump dominated it so much that it was basically Biden's reactions to Trump, not Trump's setting up Biden so we can see the true Biden. Mm-hmm. So a real missed opportunity. Is it desperation? I'm not sure that Trump feels desperation, but people are looking at it and saying that it could be desperation. And that's a bad sign, right? Because that means that people maybe begin to abandon the president. Think about the U.S. Senate races going on around the country, which have all been made much more complex because of the Supreme Court nomination. Yes. But there are several Republican senators in about 6 or 7 states that are going to have tight elections or are behind. And very, very few of them, beginning when they started running ads in June and July, mention the president at all. So you can see that they're saying, I've got to unhook myself from this guy because he's too much of a loose cannon. I need to reach out to voters. I need to win. And Trump becomes a distraction from that. Okay, so Jim, I think we're seeing a continuation of that kind of thing.
So we're down to like our last minute, if that. But you have to leave us with, I'm hoping, an inspirational thought, because I think everybody's mood is a little low this morning. Whether they support Trump, don't support Trump, whatever their political, they're like, what did I see? I don't like it. Is there any reason that you can give us to be hopeful?
No pressure here, Jim.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, remember, democracy is not about the freedom to change other people's minds. It's about freedom of speech. And last night, what we saw was a very rough form of freedom of speech. In television, we've never seen it for a televised debate. But if we go back to the 1800s, this was the norm for debates for people running for national office. That rough and tumble name-calling Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas kind of thing, that was what happened. And people responded to it, they cast their votes, and the country moved on. The country was able to survive it, and in some cases thrive because of it. So what we're seeing is something we're not used to, but it is a form of democracy. It's a rougher form, but it's a form of getting it out there.
Right. Bravo.
And, be happy that we have a democracy where this can happen. We have the freedom to hear these people, and they have the freedom to express themselves, even if they don't do it very well.
Brenda, I think Jim gave you what you were looking for there.
Yep.
That wraps
Always
it up
comes through.
For Sunrise Extra. We do have